Hi, second period. Okay, Molly and Kip are alone in the woods. Tell me something. He was looking at her now. Why was the tree giving you letters from Ma and Dad? Molly looked down at her skirt and ran her fingers over the muddy, frayed fabric. Sounds like you already know, she said. I need to hear you say it. Molly clenched her jaw, recalling the things she had fought so hard to banish from her mind. Somewhere in the darkness she could hear the river flowing between black trees. Every time I hear that river, it brings me back to the sea. She could hear them now, screaming over the crash of waves. She swallowed. You don't remember when we left Ireland, but by the time we reached port, you was sick with fever. Kip hung his head. It's not your fault. Lots of folks were getting sick, and that boat didn't help none. It was shameful the way they packed us in, kept us locked below decks like animals, barely any food or water. I suppose we were animals to them. She clenched her fists, remembering. The second night it was all four of us huddled in one little bunk. There was a storm. The boat was rocking so violent, folks were sliding right off their beds. We could hear the rain outside. Wind and thunder shook the whole sea. Black water started coming in through portholes. The crew was running and shouting on the deck. We called for him to let us out of the hold, but nobody listened. That whole time Ma kept you in her arms, singing to you softly, the way she did when we was little. Molly blinked into the flames, hearing her mother's voice. Finally there was a huge crack like the spine of the earth breaking in two. Water started pouring in from the deck above, filling up around our ankles. Da and some other men broke through the door, and everybody ran to the deck. I helped Ma carry you up. One of the masts had snapped right in half. White sheets was all ripped to rags. The rain was coming sideways, waves big as mountains all around. The crew was gone. They deserted us, left us to die. Kip was holding his crutch. There weren't no lifeboats? Ah, there was one left, with enough room for maybe 20. People fought like beasts to get into it, but Dad, he fought harder. We reached the boat just before they was gonna cut it loose. The men said there was only room for two. Molly looked away from Kip. Her heart was pounding in her ears. It was hard to breathe. It was harder to speak. She took a slow breath. Ma and Dad put you in my arms and put me on the boat. I screamed at 'em not to, but they wouldn't hear me. Ma pulled me close. Take care of him, she said. He's yours now. She let go and then she blinked, tears spilling from her eyes. And then they were gone. Molly crumpled her face in her hands. The tears she had been storing inside her for so long broke free. The sobs took hold of her entire body. If Kip spoke or moved, she did not hear it. She swallowed, wiping her face. I meant to tell you, I swear. But when we landed and you woke up and you asked where Ma and Dad was, she shook her head as a new wave of tears came. I couldn't do it. I couldn't say the words. She pressed her lips together. And so I told you a story. You didn't tell a story, Kip said softly. You lied. Even in the orange light of the fire, his face looked pale. I know there's nothing I can do to fix this. Molly reached toward him, but he pulled away. I was scared. I wanted it to be true. I wanted to think of them out there in the world having adventure, and part of me thought it could be true. Their ship was lost, but maybe they got away. They didn't, Kip said. He sounded firm. Molly nodded. I know. I know. And I wanted to tell you the truth, but then I found the tree and I found the letters written Ma's own hand, and I thought, what if it were real? What if a miracle had happened and Ma and Dad were still out there? If somehow they survived? It would mean my lie wasn't a lie at all. It would mean we weren't alone. I didn't expect you to forgive me, not now, maybe not ever, but I need you to understand that I was trying to protect you. I was trying to do right. Kip released a heavy breath. How many folks buried round that tree thought they was doing right? Molly did not answer. She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. Her brother glared at her and lowered his head. I want to hate you. I want to kick and scream at you for lying to me. But the lie wasn't really for me. That was your wish. I had something else in my heart, something I longed for even more than Ma and Dad. He clasped the tin in his hands, and when he looked back at Molly, his eyes were shimmering with tears. So what kind of person does that make me? Molly grabbed hold of him, pulling him to her. It makes you a regular person. No more, no less. She felt his arms clasped tight around her ribs. She pressed her face into his messy red hair. They held each other for a long moment, arms tight, faces buried. It was a different sort of embrace. There was no coddling. It was strength upon strength. Kip held her up as she held him up. I think I figured it out, she sniffed, looking up at the stars. Hester asked me what the difference between a story and a lie was. At the time, I told her that a story helps folks. Helps them do what? She asked. Well, I think I know the answer. A story helps folks face the world even when it frightens them, and a lie does the opposite. It helps you hide. She felt Kip's arms loosen. Suppose that's all the tree does, really. He pulled back to look at her. It helps you lie to yourself and pretend the world ain't there. He reached for the medicine, which was resting on the log beside him. He gave a wistful smile, perhaps for a moment imagining himself whole, and then tossed the tin into the fire. Sparks flew up into the darkness as the tin began to crackle and hiss, his dream burning into nothing. Molly stared at him, watching as he stoically stirred in the charred remains with his crutch. Kip, you're the bravest person I ever met. Kip wiped his nose and stared into the fire. You know what I wish for? Molly shook her head. No more wishes. He turned toward her. I wish that Ma and Dad could see you right now. Oh, Molly laughed, wiping her eyes. They'd be horrified. Nah, Kip shook his head, smiling. They'd be so proud, especially of you. Molly looked away, not wanting to cry again. And do you know what they'd say to us? Molly pressed her lips together. Tell me. They'd say, Kip, Molls, we love you dearly, and we want you both to live a good, full life. He stared out at the woods. But there's a whole family at that house that needs saving. Molly looked at him. In the warm glow, she could almost see the lines of her father's profile. Even more, she knew Kip was right. Escaping the night gardener meant deserting the Windsors. She thought of Constance, her skin pale, body wasting away. She thought of the Graves. She thought of Penny. Kip caught her eye. Those folks are in trouble, Molls. Someone needs to go back and warn them before it's too late. And we're all they've got. He nodded toward the wagon. Well, us and Galileo. Molly took a deep breath. She longed with everything in her to leave this valley and never return. But she knew that running solved nothing. They had to go back. She squeezed his hand tight. Let's hope that's enough. Chapter 42 is Return to the Sour Woods. Kip and his sister decided to wait until daybreak before returning to the Windsor Manor. They had only ever seen the gardener appear at night, and they hoped that the light would protect them. After a few fitful hours by the fire, they awoke with the first rays of dawn and set out on the wagon. They rode into the valley without speaking, silence to match the silence. Kip clutched the reins, going over the plan they had discussed the night prior. He would collect their things from the stables, and if he could be found, give Dr. Crouch a proper burial. Molly, meanwhile, would go into the house and make one final attempt at convincing Master Windsor to leave with this family. It wasn't much of a plan, but at least they could say they tried. The job seemed simple enough, but when they reached the final bend and Kip saw the house, he felt his entire body tense. You sure it's smart to go back there? He said. I'm sure it's not. Molly reached down and squeezed his hand. But there's what's smart and what's right, and Ma and Dad would want us to do what's right. Hold your breath, Kip said, and they rolled over the bridge. He eyed the river beneath them. He remembered his first time crossing the rotting bridge, the unnameable dread he had felt upon seeing the manor and grounds. It seemed like years ago, when in fact it had only been a little over a month. When they reached the other side, he stopped the cart. What are you doing? Molly said as he climbed down from the bench. There's something I want to look at. An idea was coming to him. Maybe there was a chance to do more than just Fanny. Oh my goodness. Maybe there was a chance to do more than just warn the family. He slid Courage out from beneath his seat and fit it under his arm. I won't be long. You'd better not be, he said, taking the reins. He saw her nervously glance toward the river. You be careful near the water. Kip smiled. You be careful near the tree. He eyed the sun over the sour woods. Mornin's half over. If we want the family out by sundown, we'd better get to moving. Molly nodded, snapped the reins, and continued toward the house. Kip watched her shrink into the distance, a tangle of wild hair atop a slender frame. She looked so different now, less like his big sister and more like a grown person, not a stranger exactly, but like someone he knew only in passing, someone with thoughts and joys and pains that were hidden to him. His gaze shifted to the tree. It rose up like a tower in the harsh morning light, offering welcome shade on a hot day, and scattered around it a bed of comfortable leaves to lie upon. He shook his head, thinking about what was waiting beneath those leaves. Watch your step, Malls, he said under his breath. Kip turned around, resting his weight on his crutch. When Dad gave it to him, the cross piece had been taller than Kip's head. Now it was an effort to keep the crutch from slipping out from under his arm. Still, it was his courage, and he felt better simply for having it with him. He looked at the bridge that separated the island from the main road. Maybe the bridge was the key to stopping the tree? Kip had seen what the Gardner was capable of, and had no intention of fighting him. But if he could somehow make the bridge collapse, then at least the other people wouldn't be able to cross over. Maybe the tree would die on its own, from a lack of fresh vitamins? It was worth a try. Kip moved onto the bridge, keeping one hand on the thick rope, looking for weak spots in the wood. It was an ancient structure, and he felt continual surprise that it hadn't fallen into the river ages ago. He hoped this meant that it wouldn't take much to chop it down. The boards were slick with dew and mildew, and he nearly slipped a few times as he hopped from plank to plank. He stopped a few feet from the main road when he thought the bridge might be weakest. He set down his crutch and gingerly got to his knees. The sound of rushing water filled his ears as he leaned over the edge, peering at the beams beneath. Thick black tendrils consumed the undercarriage. The roots extended all the way from the island and ended just before the road. So that's why this bridge ain't fallen down yet, he muttered, almost implied. The tree don't want it to. Kip stared at the roots, something else sticking in his mind. He remembered their flight in the wagon. The night Gardner had chased them to the end of the bridge and then stopped at the very spot, as if pulled backward by some outside force. He remembered that night when he was spared in the garden when the same thing happened. Of course, he said, sitting up. He can only go as far as the roots. Who can? Said a voice in his ear. He turned around to see Alistair standing a little bit behind him. I'm going to stop right there.